Hey guys, I'm Ted, here to give you another lecture, and for this lecture we'll be wrapping up our lecture on the Old West to the Early Republic. And before we begin our lecture proper, I simply like to do our customary recap and just touch bases on what we discussed last time. So in our last lecture we discussed the native removal. We discussed the Trail of Tears and how the Cherokees who had been the most successful native group to assimilate into European American standards of living and civil governance, how they had lost all their cases at the Georgia, all their appeals at the Georgia state level, and taken their case to the federal Supreme Court. But they lost their case in the, they won their case, sorry about that. They won the case of Worcester v. Georgia, but the sitting president, Andrew Jackson, refused to defend the Supreme Court's decision and allowed the state of Georgia to forcibly remove the Cherokees from their ancestral land, resulting in the infamous Trail of Tears. We also discussed how the Cherokees, with a bittersweet moment for them, they lost their ancestral land, but the Cherokee slave owners were allowed to keep their human property there. They were allowed to take their slaves with them. The state of Georgia did not attempt to deprive them of their slave property. They didn't want to set a precedent with a government, a civil government, being able to take someone's slave property from them. So the Cherokees were allowed to take them with them. We also discussed how after Indian removal began, settlement was swift, and that the states were quickly, very swiftly admitted into the Union, but they were admitted in pairs to ensure sectional balance. And by 1820, perfect balance had actually been met. There were 22 states in the Union, 11 free states and 11 slave states. And that stood until Missouri applied for admission in 1820. Now, Missouri was applying as a slave state, and Missouri's admission threatened to throw off the balance that had been maintained, that had been maintained since 1816 with the admission of Indiana, and then 1817 with the admission of Mississippi. So to combat that, to sort of dampen sectional tensions and to assure national unity, a compromise was struck. Henry Clay proposed admitting the non-contiguous Maine District of Massachusetts as a free state and allowing Missouri to enter as a slave state to ensure sectional balance in the Senate. And that is where we left off. And with that being said, let's jump right back into our westward expansion and our history of the Old West of the Early Republic. So the Missouri Compromise faced pro-slavery forces, forced pro-slavery forces, in the United States to expand into the Republic of Mexico, which had won its independence from the extremely long-lived Spanish colonial empire. The United Mexican States, seeking to secure her hold on the sparsely settled northern territories and by the citizens from the United States of America to settle the northern state of Texas, the northern Mexican state of Texas. The immigrants to settle in Texas were led by Moses and his son Sam Houston. The Mexican government had at first been pleased with the enthusiasm of the immigrants who decided to move in and settle Texas, but was soon dismayed by the mounting number of new arrivals. 30,000 immigrants from the United States had arrived into Mexico by 1835, and they found Texas to be perfect for subsistence farming, livestock rearing, and cotton cultivation. And cotton cultivation meant the use of slave labor. Now, the Mexican government had the immigrants agree to a number of stipulations upon arrival, such as conversion to Roman Catholicism, adopting Spanish as the civil language, and banning the practice of slavery in the province of Texas. Now, in 1833, Antonio de Lopez de Santa Anna overthrew the Mexican Republic and established a personal dictatorship in the mold of Napoleon Bonaparte. Antonio de Lopez de Santa Anna really was a major fan of Napoleon Bonaparte. He even had the Mexican Army's uniforms redesigned along Napoleonic France's uniforms. And in an effort to cut off an attempt by the American population of Texas, which had already dwarfed the Mexican population from establishing an independent state, Santa Anna stripped the Mexican states, all of them, of virtually all of their civil autonomy, their regional autonomy. Now, this alienated the Tejano Texans, and then the Tejanos are simply Texans of Mexican descent, and the elites of the other Mexican states. And really, Santa Anna's centralizing, high-handed centralizing practices really just alienated all of the Mexicans and the American immigrants in Texas. This really provoked an uprising in Texas, where Santa Anna had sent Mexican federal troops to secure the Mexican-American border, which at this point was eastern Texas, western Louisiana. He sent troops there to secure the border to prevent more immigration from the United States. The Texans, the Tejanos, and the Americans and Texans rose up and actually drove out Santa Anna's army. Tejano Grandes, like once again, and Anglo-Texans like Sam Houston and Stephen Austin actually led this rebellion, this revolt, and established in March of 1836 the independent Republic of Texas. Now, the odds of the Texas Republic survival was very small. To meet the challenge, Santa Anna had actually to meet the challenge of restoring order and putting down this, which at this time was merely a revolt. Santa Anna had raised an army of 4,000 men and staged an awe-inspiring midwinter march from central Mexico into Texas, catching the revolutionaries off guard and sending them into panic. Now, the small garrison in San Antonio barricaded itself into an old, crumbling Spanish mission known locally as the Alamo. And there they defiantly resisted Santa Anna's assaults for 13 days until an all-out attack by the Mexican army overwhelmed the defenders. Now, the Alamo was a minor affair from a military point of view. The defenders had been ordered to destroy the building and retreat from Santa Anna's approaching force. Santa Anna had lost a few hundred men and taken the fort, but not really enough to cripple his invasion force. What made the Alamo a significant event was Santa Anna's decision to summarily execute the survivors after the siege had ended. The American immigrants rose up across eastern Texas in outrage and in terror. Remember, the Alamo became a magnetic rallying cry for the revolutionaries, and a small ragtag force under Sam Houston lulled the Mexican army into a sense of comfort. Santa Anna, in his chase to secure victory and martial honor for himself, really just to prop up his home rule back in Mexico City, unwisely divided his army into smaller components. Houston, after learning of Santa Anna's decision to divide his force, turned and literally caught the Mexican forces commanded by Santa Anna sleeping. They were taking their midday siesta, that is a nap. The resulting battle of San Jacinto was a spectacular rout for the Texans. Sam Houston had scattered Santa Anna's personal forces and captured the Mexican president, who had signed an agreement recognizing Texas's independence before scurrying back to Mexico to attempt to reinforce his administration, repudiating his agreement with Houston along the way. Now, the ultimate goal of the Texans was not to remain independent, but to join the United States as a new state as soon as possible. It was widely known that the Mexicans had not given up the principle but merely conceded the issue temporarily. Soon after his return to Mexico City, Santa Anna fell from power, and a new round of political instability began in Mexico. All while this instability flared, the general consensus was that once order had been restored at home, a new campaign against the Texans would be launched to bring them into heel and to unite Mexico as a whole. Now, this is where things really get tricky. So the year right now is 1836. Texas had just won its independence from Mexico, and Mexico is in disarray. Andrew Jackson is in the last year of his presidency, and Martin Van Buren, Jackson's chosen successor, has just been elected president. Martin Van Buren's political support base was firmly Jacksonian. He was a Jacksonian Democrat, or at least at this time in his political career, he was riding the waves of the support of the Jacksonian Democrats. Now, the Jacksonian Democrats was mostly comprised of Southerners who were eager to expand slavery. Van Buren was a New Yorker. He was an old Dutch New Yorker, and was less than eager to promote the expansion of slavery or entwine the United States in a foreign dispute over what was a rebelling Mexican province. The Panic of 1837 also complicated the issue because Van Buren was also not eager to assume responsibility for the war debt accrued by the Texas revolutionaries. And to further throw chaos and disorder onto this situation, in 1840, Van Buren was defeated in the presidential election by William Henry Harrison, ushering the Jacksonian Democrats out of power and the Whigs into power. Now, Harrison was a Whig, and the Whigs were interested in developing the internal economy of the Republic rather than picking up the bill for expansionist adventures across the Mississippi River. So Texas remained an unwilling but independent republic, as both the United States and Mexico had similar internal disorders that they really needed to attend to. You would see that it would take about 10 years for the Mexicans to get things in order to nearly be on the way to settle the Texas issue. Now, unfortunately, William Henry Harrison died 1 month into his presidency, and the Whigs found themselves saddled with Harrison's vice president, John Tyler. Now, Tyler soon came to loggerheads with Clay, Webster, and all the other Whig leaders because Tyler opposed every bill for internal improvement. He also opposed the bill for resurrecting the National Bank, and he also opposed bills for protective tariffs. He flatly refused to endorse any of them that were sent to him. This eventually led to Tyler's entire cabinet resigning, and he attempted to form his own independent political power base among his fellow Southerners and slave owners. He tried to turn Texas annexation into a campaign issue that he could ride successfully back into the White House in 1844. Now, it should have been easy for John Tyler to do. It was already clear to his contemporaries that the United States had a destiny to rule the lands between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The expedient resolution of the Missouri question, the captivating victory of the Texas immigrants, and the ease with which the early republic had assimilated the wilderness of the Old West, of the early republic into civilized polities gave rise to the notion that the United States had a manifest destiny to prosper unabated. Now, manifest in this sense of the word means obvious or self-evident. The notion, however, was part self-interest and partly romantic. The self-interested part was based on Southern desires has anxious slave owners look to westward lands to relieve the burden of the Missouri Compromise. And Northerners also looked west to the prospect of cheap land and brave living west of the Mississippi and Louisiana Purchase country. The romantic part, fed by the paintings of American artists that represented images of the West as a vacant land of milk and honey with a few noble savages and mountain men like Kit Carson, Jedediah Smith, William H. Ashley, men like that who braved nature and the elements, like the first colonialists, like the first colonial colonists did in early colonial America. They imagined themselves literally walking in the footsteps of their ancestors, establishing, who established cities such as Jamestown and Plymouth, Charleston, and so forth. They imagined themselves as these people. They imagine themselves as living like these early Americans, like these early ancestors of theirs. The expansion, these ideas of Western expansion brought the United States into increased conflict and created a lot of friction with Great Britain. Had the boundaries in the West had not been resolved since the purchase was made in 1803. The ownership of the Oregon country was a major international dispute between the United States and Great Britain at the time. Manifest Destiny encouraged other freebooters from the United States to immigrate to other fragile republics in Central and South America to imitate the example of the Texans. Texans, that is, to destabilize the local governments, seize power, and then offer themselves up to the United States as a new possession. And the Democratic Party's nominee for the election of 1844, James K. Polk, was the living embodiment of these ideas and passions. All of the ideas and passions of Manifest Destiny, James Polk was literally, if you could put a face on it and a human body on it, that's who it will be. And with that being said, we will break here and we will come back with another lecture. And as always, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Let me know what you guys thought about this lecture. Let me know if you found it to be insightful, maybe a little entertaining. And as always, I'm Ted, and I will see you guys next time for another lecture.